Okay, so I think there's still a couple of more people who have to join us, but we can, I think, already start with the introduction for people who are already here. So, first of all, welcome everyone to tonight's event on trickle-down technology. It's in cooperation with between WEDF and the Jason Institute, and I'm glad that I am able to host it tonight. So my name is Martijn. I will be hosting it together with Dawoon.
Hello, welcome everyone. Martijn, thank you so much for having me co-host with you today. It's very exciting. Yeah, and welcome to all of you who are joining us here today. And thank you to Annie and Sander who made the time to come and have this event and make it possible for us to have as well. So I say, shall we just go straight into it then? Yeah, well, topics about data ethics and privacy have been a major concern and a big topic in recent years, but especially when we learn about these things in universities, for instance, we know generally that data privacy is an important aspect in our lives, but we don't really learn about why exactly it is important, other than the fact of governments being able to take advantage of those things in very elementary aspects, from surveillance and the minimal consequences of that. But they don't really go down into the individual reasons as to why privacy is important and the larger societal implications that it has. And as you know, technology companies are taking over the seat of influence from states when it comes to the influence that they have on people, we're starting to see some differences in the way that data is being collected and the way that they can be used and the different implications those can have on us. So we brought dear Annie and Sander with us to talk with us today. Annie is a director of the World Ethical Data Foundation and a former MI5 whistleblower. And Sander here is the data protection officer of the World Ethical Data Foundation and Forum. And he is also the director of Asteroid, a software development company. So please take it away.
Yes, well, I'm going to spend about 20 minutes scaring everyone about how vulnerable they are on the internet, how vulnerable their data is on the internet. And there are two aspects I want to discuss. One is the conceptual idea of privacy and why it's so bloody important. And the second is how we can protect ourselves, I think, which is what Sander's going to be discussing. But Dawoon, as you said, I'm a former MI5 intelligence officer who went on the run in the late 1990s to help a whistleblowing case and had to live with the concept of having no privacy whatsoever for 7 years. And I can't even guarantee my privacy ever since. So the concept of why privacy is important has become very central to my life and central also to my work and why I work with so many different organizations. And I do want to thank Jason Institute for hosting this so that we can discuss this. The concept of privacy was put in place under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights way back in 1948, straight after the Second World War, because the governments of the world realized that without privacy, you can't have pushback against an encroaching totalitarian regime, which is what Nazism did in Germany. And also, it's the only way that we can actually push back democratically as citizens to protect ourselves. So this was all well and good. You know, we had this universal right, we could protect it and all that sort of stuff. But then it got unprotected when the internet began and when the World Wide Web began. And the initial utopian ideal of the World Wide Web was great. But then, of course, it got taken over by, you know, monopolistic tech giant corporations, mainly coming out of America, and mainly predating and protecting their data and harvesting our data thereby in order to make huge profits. So what I want to do in this 20 minutes is try to scope out what the threats are that we face when it comes to our privacy on the internet. And I say this as well because I'm painfully aware that most of the Jason Institute people who are watching this are probably digital natives. They have known no world without the internet, without access to their smartphones or to their computers. And I just want to show them how vulnerable that can make all of us, because I remember a world without the internet. So the basic arguments, the basic questions are, who actually controls the hardware that we use, i.e. the smartphones or the computers? Who controls the software on those smartphones or computers? And who can access it through backdoors, be it criminals or spies or corporations who want to predate on our data? And what I want to just lay out, I suppose, now is the intersection between those three key threats. Because most people think, well, the spies will spy and they will do what they do in order to protect national security or to fight against terrorists. What we have seen, though, over the last decade, and what was confirmed by Edward Snowden, the NSA whistleblower who came out in 2013, and I can't believe it's 9 years ago, was the fact that there was a huge intersection between the American tech giant corporations and the spies, whether wittingly or unwittingly. The spies had backdoors built into their corporations. So that meant that all the information we were giving out for free to organizations like Facebook or Twitter or any of the others could be easily accessed by the spies, and that data could be hacked and used and all the rest of it. To make it worse, though, we found out in 2017 from the WikiLeaks disclosure, which was called Vault 7, that these corporations, the CIA particularly, had also been hacked. So any of the messages, any of the vulnerabilities that they were getting through because of this backdooring of corporations and their data harvesting, and any of the vulnerabilities the CIA might have found, actually fell into the public domain. Then, of course, we found out a year later, the NSA had a leak, and it went on the public market under the shadow brokers, a criminal organization, of all their cyber weapons and cyber caches of vulnerabilities into corporate organizations. So even the intelligence agencies cannot keep these vulnerabilities, these backdoors, these zero hacks or whatever safe. So these will fall into criminal hands. And this is what we've seen over the last few years, particularly in the UK with the WannaCry hack, which basically is ransomware that held NHS systems to ransom. So this caused a huge amount of problems, and this makes us all vulnerable because the spies will do this. The people who have access to it, be it leakers or be it criminals, can then abuse it, and that makes us all very, very, very vulnerable. So going back to my particular experience, years and years ago, in the 1990s, I worked as an intelligence officer for MI5 in the UK. And then I resigned to help my former partner and colleague blow the whistle on a series of spy crimes. By doing so, we broke the Official Secrets Act in the UK. And by doing so, therefore, we went on the run around Europe. We lived in hiding for a year. We lived in exile for a year. And we lived for 7 years awaiting a very long, drawn-out trial. So certainly in those years, I'm certain that we were being predated on, we were being surveyed, we had no privacy, be it bugs in our home, interception of our communications, some of our friends spying on us. So the notion of living without privacy is a very personal thing for me. It's a really difficult thing to live without. And you become so self-censoring. You become so careful in what you watch, what you communicate, how you talk to your friends and family. It's an appalling way to live. It's very corrosive to the human spirit. Now, if we scale it up to what now happens, this is the 1990s I'm talking about, what now happens with the corporations and with the nation state actors and with the criminals, all of us are much more vulnerable to all these sort of spy endeavors. And I think that is very corrosive, not just to the human personal spirit, but also very corrosive to societal levels and also democracy, as we saw with the Cambridge Analytica scandal a few years ago too. So if we feel we are being watched personally, societally, democratically, we start to self-censor. We don't communicate as openly as we should. And therefore, our democracies and our societies and our communities cannot work as well as they should. So this is why I feel so strongly about why privacy is so damned important. And that's why we should think about it. Now, as I said, I'm aware that the Jason Institute is a student organization, and it's great that you're taking an interest in these sort of things. But if most of the people listening to this are in their teens or in their 20s, you need to remember what the world was like before the easy access to everything on your smartphone, the easy access to everything on your computer, because these are all being spied on. And that's what people need to start thinking about. The hardware, as I mentioned, one of the Snowden disclosures was that all hardware made after 2008 has backdoors built into it, so that anyone can switch on your microphone or switch on your video or whatever, just like that. If you are using your computer and you're using a closed proprietary software, such as Apple or such as Microsoft, they will have backdoors built into them, as we know from the Snowden disclosures way back in 2013, all forgotten, which will allow these corporations to be penetrated by spy agencies. Or even worse now, over the last couple of years, we've had the Pegasus disclosures. This is a program developed by a company in Israel called the NSO that has been targeting key diplomatic and government human rights lawyers and media around the world over the last few years. And you don't even have to click on some dodgy link. It's a zero-click attack. It gets into your phone, it gets into your computer, just using a popular app like WhatsApp. So we are becoming so used to using our little phones, to do everything, including paying and linking it to our bank accounts. That leaves us wide open to all sorts of hacks and attacks, not just the criminal hackers, but also potentially through nation state actors and potentially through other actors as well. So all I'm saying is we need to be thinking about these issues. We need to be considering our privacy going forward. And if we don't, we are wide open to abuse and attacks and hacks. So this all sounds terribly dystopian. I'm very well aware of that. But from my personal experience of living without privacy, I know how difficult it can be. And from my personal experience of organizing events in Berlin and taking various whistleblowers around the Stasi headquarters, for example, and looking at the history of how endemic the spying was in East Germany before the Berlin Wall came down, and how much effect that had on the stifling of freedom of expression, the stifling of the ability to fight back against a draconian government. I think we all need to start thinking about this. We can't take it for granted, even in the West, that we will always have liberty, we will always have freedom of speech, we will always have the right to protest. So this is my warning from history, as I'm quite old now, and also work with a number of lovely, even older campaigners about why these sort of issues are important and why the World Ethical Data Forum particularly is speaking out about this stuff, and why the World Ethical Data Foundation is researching the way to future-proof our data online and make sure that it can be private and protected, and that we can uphold our human rights online. So I would just like to, I suppose, finish with the idea that people talk about digital rights. I think that's a fake argument. We are living our lives increasingly online. We've had to because of COVID, when we all got locked up, locked down, or whatever the phrase is. And therefore we had to trust our tech, and therefore we had no choice in the apps or the systems we were using. I mean, I've been forced onto Zoom, whatever. But if we have to do this increasingly, and who knows where monkeypox or all the other threats might be coming from, we might have to do it again in the future. We need to be sure that we can trust the tech and the hardware, the software, and the future proofing that we're using. If we don't do that, we don't think along these lines, we are making ourselves and our descendants increasingly vulnerable. One of the final points I would make about this as well is, I mean, people are talking about quantum computing. how that is going to break any security we will already have online. And then this sort of reductio ad absurdum argument that I always use in talks is, if we get to a point where we could potentially upload our consciousness and thereby potentially live forever, who is going to own the hardware on which we are uploaded? Who is going to own the software? Who is going to have access to that copyright of our software? Who is going to have access to looking at our software and what we say? I know this sounds like a ridiculous argument, but I think it highlights the issues that we are facing today when it comes to the issues we are dealing with today, and we should be thinking about today. So I suppose the wrap up for this rather dystopian talk is, I think that people coming through, youngsters growing up, knowing nothing but access to the internet, should be thinking about the baseline of privacy and the other human rights. That is what it is, not just thinking about, this is convenient, this is a wonderful phone, I can pay stuff, I can do stuff on the phone. Everything can be watched, everything can be hacked, and everything can be attacked by criminals. So let's think about these issues, come together as a community, and try and deal with the potential threats that we might be facing. So I hope I haven't scared everyone too much, but as a former MI5 intelligence officer and someone who was a whistleblower, who went on the run, who's worked with many other whistleblowers coming out of the intelligence agencies, this is how I see the world. And I want people to wake up to the potential threats. And therefore, I will pass over to Sander in a way that he can address, this is how you can protect yourself online, because it's so damned important. And people should be thinking about this. People should be speaking about this. And people should be campaigning about this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Annie. Dylan, if you could show the next slide. We'll start with a couple of slides here for my bit. So Annie has been talking about the sort of the general overview of the threats that we faced, both in history for himself and in general, as well as you know, what privacy actually means, the human rights aspects and stuff. What I want to start with is sort of a couple of threat modeling questions, right? Because in data security, it's always depends what kind of threat you're up against and how likely it is that will be compromised. And those questions need to be answered before you can really sort of propose a good solution to mitigate your risks. So for instance, what data do you want to protect and who you're up against? I've put it here on the slide. An example that's maybe instructive. So let's say that you were wanting to protect patient data for a hospital or something. Then the data you want to protect is obviously your medical data of your patients. And then who you're up against is, well, for instance, hackers are a classical one, but there's more threats as well. There's also employees, ex-employees, anyone who may have had access to those systems. So this is why it's important that you keep accounts secure and make sure that only the right people have access, even after they left the organization. But also another important question: how bad are the consequences? So in the case of losing patient data to a hacker, for instance, that could be used for financial benefit by the hacker. It's obviously a violation of the GDPR, or the AVG as it's called in the Netherlands. And medical data is especially protected under those acts as well, as it's especially sensitive. It could be used by certain other actors as well, to use your medical history to do something to you that may be hurting you or maybe deadly. So you want to prevent that. And then of course comes the question: how likely is it that you'll need to protect it? Well, it's very likely, of course, that there will be some sort of actor, whether it's ex-employee or an employee or a hacker, who comes in and takes the data at some point. Especially the longer the organization exists, the more data is collected, the more attractive it becomes to gain access to that. And this also depends on who you're up against. If you're up against a nation state, you're going to have to take different measures than if you're up against your kid sister, let's say. So another question is, how much trouble are you willing to go through? Because this is always a little bit difficult. You can always take measure after measure after measure to try and protect the data, but if by taking those measures, it often becomes more and more difficult to follow through. The more complex the system becomes, the easier it is to make a mistake or slip up, and you want to prevent that as well. So that's basically what the threat model is, to sort of make sure that you map what data you want to protect and what you're up against, and the consequences and stuff. Could you go to the next slide, please? So I'm going to take you through a couple of points, and these are going to be fairly easy points. I'm not going to go into huge, deep technical detail, although I will point out solutions as well. I'm going to talk about account security. After that, I'm going to talk about a little bit of device security. After that, your network, how you connect to the internet. And then I'm going to talk about a couple of privacy-friendly alternatives to messaging and email that I want to sort of give to you as well as a tip. So for the password or for the account security, first of all, obviously everyone has all kinds of accounts, your Netflix account, Spotify, your email, you name it. There are all kinds of accounts that every person who is online has and has to secure somehow. And this also depends on the threat model, right? Because your email account, for instance, is a lot more important than an account to a forum, let's say, because your email is often used as a key to gain access to other accounts. Everyone has seen forgot password forums and stuff that ask for an email address and send an email with a confirm link or something. So obviously, if that email ends up in the wrong hands, then someone can gain access to your other accounts. So that's why it's important to have to have multiple levels of security, depending on what accounts you have. Obviously, you should strive for the best solution in every case. So with passwords, it's pretty easy. Never use the same password twice. The length is important. The longer a password is, the more secure it is in general. And the problem, so that immediately introduces a problem, right? Because nobody can remember passwords. It's terrible, especially if you're, like me. I'm, working professionally with many sort of online accounts and web server hosting and stuff as well. So you need to make sure that you keep that separate and organized and stored securely, because I can't remember it all in my head. At the same time, you want to be able to use different passwords for every account to make sure that if one password is compromised, that you're not immediately compromising all the others. So an easy way to do that is using a password manager. For instance, I've mentioned a couple of good examples, Bitwarden, KeePass, or KeePassXC. I self use KeePass, but there are a couple of examples and there are others as well. Basically, what this allows you to do is organize all your passwords for all your accounts in one encrypted place. It can be a file on your computer. It can be online somewhere. That depends on the implementation. As long as the key is kept on your device, it's still secure. And what allows you to do is to organize that and to basically access all of your accounts using one master password that you do remember. Or a physical key, let's say, like a YubiKey, could also be used. So that makes it a lot easier to generate automatically a password for every new account that you make, because that way you're better protected if one of those passwords leaks. Because then it's only one account compromised and not 200. So that's important to do as a first step, I would say. Another very important step for account security is two-factor authentication. So what this is essentially a second factor for your login. So normally you log in with, say, a username and a password, and then you click login and you're in. So that is something that you know, a username and a password. And the second factor in two-factor authentication is something that you have. So this could be a phone or another device with an app on it, and I've mentioned a couple of them here. Or it could be a physical key, like a YubiKey, for instance. And what this allows you to do is it basically generates numbers every 10 to 15 seconds, and that for the services that support it, they will require, if you turn it on, a second login bit, which is the random number, right? So you log in with your username and password, then it asks for the random number just to confirm that it's you. This way, if someone compromises the account or gains access to your password and tries to log in and has your password, your username, they still cannot log in because they don't have the device. So they can't enter the code that way. So that's a great solution to secure a lot of accounts that way, and it's more and more supported nowadays. Many huge services like Google and Meta and others have supported it for years now. And there's a variety of apps that support it, including free and open source variations. So that's a good second step for account security. I do want to talk a little bit about phishing here as well. Phishing is someone trying to use social engineering attacks on you to gain access to certain things. So this could be via a fake email or a phone call or something of the sort. A very popular variation is, for instance, a post service. So, for instance, DHL or UPS or PostNL. When you're expecting a package, you're much more likely to click that link because you would like to know where your package is, and that way you can get compromised. And an easy way to detect this, because usually, they deliberately have certain indicators in them to target the right population. But the way that you can detect it is, first of all, where it's from. So check the headers and see whether the from header in the email is actually from the domain of the company that is supposed to send it. So check that an email from UPS is actually from ups.com instead of some compromised email account that ends in Gmail or something, right? So that's a good first red flag to look for. Another one is a sense of urgency. So if you notice a sense of urgency there, that they really want you to click on the link fast. For instance, your account is getting closed if you don't solve this within a day or two. That's a sense of urgency because they want to make you click that link without paying too much attention. Another good indicator is spelling and grammar mistakes. Often they're deliberately put in there because they want to target not the smartest people, but they want to have there's a certain group of people that's vulnerable to scams that might also be vulnerable to other such scams, and that's more profitable than wasting a lot of time on a person who is more in the know. So that's another good indicator. And another one is obviously check links before you click them. And if you don't, if they are going to a completely different domain, that's a red flag. And if you don't trust it, the best way to make sure is to just open a browser and go to the website themselves, right? So if you're expecting a package, let's say, you can just open up ups.com and enter in your tracking number there, rather than clicking the button in the email. So that's another point that I wanted to make regarding a way that your account could be compromised is with phishing. Next slide, please. Next point, device security. Very, very important. Update all your software. It's very easy, and it's the best defense against 0 days. 0-day attacks are vulnerabilities in software that are not widely known, that basically the developer themselves don't even know. And this is often used by, as Annie said, intelligence agencies or Pegasus or any of such software, surveillance software, in order to gain access to your devices. If you're running old software, those things are not patched, but it also makes you vulnerable if you're running old software to older vulnerabilities. Like nobody is immune to 0 days. I mean, if it happens and some intelligence agency somewhere knows a 0 day that even the developer doesn't know about, then obviously there won't be a defense against that until it is patched. But for all the other vulnerabilities that are out there, that's the vast majority. That is vulnerabilities in older software, older versions of software. So, and this is often used to gain access as well, because it's much more likely that someone doesn't update their software either because it's difficult or because they don't have the time, or they worry about losing their data or something. And then if you then don't update, because then you might say, okay, it works. Yeah, it does, until the moment that you're compromised. So always keep your software up to date, and that includes your OS, that includes your browser especially, that includes your email client, that includes everything that you have installed on there. The next point, a couple of privacy enhancing changes to your browser. A really good one is for Firefox and I think Chrome as well. You block origin, which blocks ads. Ads are a huge attack vector for compromises because they run JavaScript, so they run essentially code in the browser. Now every website can do that, obviously, but the sort of the centralized nature of ad networks makes it very easy to compromise a lot of systems at once. If, say, Google were compromised and everyone who gets shown that ad runs malware suddenly, that's a huge attack factor. So if you're blocking ads, that gets rid of not only this sort of huge attack vector, but it also makes browsing a lot easier. Because you don't have to deal with ads. And there are other extensions as well, like HTTPS everywhere and clean URLs. But also a good thing for your browser would be to use DuckDuckGo or Startpage for search instead of Google. But this is more related to Google building a pattern of your behavior and what you're thinking about and what they can market to you. So if you're using DuckDuckGo, then they get less information and becomes less useful for them. So the other point is the OS choices. So as Annie has already mentioned, proprietary software is a risk. So things like Microsoft Windows or Mac OS 10 is a risk, but so you should consider open source software. So things like Linux is a good choice, and many user-friendly Linux distributions like Ubuntu, for instance, or Fedora. But if you're getting into the sort of high-risk situations, then you're dealing with a different ballgame altogether. Then you're dealing with the nation states. So in that case, there are specialized operating systems that run all of your connections through the Tor network, which is onion routing. So it goes through various hops across the internet, so it can't be traced. And that's Tails and Cubes do that as well. Cubes specifically is nice because it doesn't run everything through Tor, but it does run everything in containers. So if you're having malware run in your browser, let's say, it doesn't affect the entire system. So it's all containerized and kept separate. For encryption, it's another important point you should think about, especially for devices that you can lose easily. So think about, laptops, tablets, mobile phones. Use encryption wherever possible. Android has it built in. And for hard disk encryption or USB stick encryption, there are solutions like Veracrypt. Veracrypt specifically also allow you to initialize a hidden volume, which means that there are essentially two encrypted volumes on the disk, and you can unlock one with one password and one with the other. So if you're ever forced to give up a password, you can give up one that is a bit less consequential, less dangerous than the information that you really want to keep secret, which is unlocked with the second password. And there's mathematically no way to detect whether such a hidden volume is used. So that's safe as well. I mean, no, but there's no way to detect whether that is the case or not. So for Linux, there's LUKS for hard disk encryption that's automatically enabled in many cases for many distros. And for email, GPT and Thunderbird is a good solution. The next point is backups. Very important because they help you recover from ransomware and all kinds of other things that you might lose data from. The key point with backups is they have to be kept automatically, so you don't forget. And use what I call the 3-to-1 rule. So you need to have 3 copies, 1 working copy and 2 backups, and then keep those 2 backups on 2 separate storage media, or like you can put one on a network attached storage and another one offsite on a server somewhere, let's say, or in the cloud, encrypted, and that way you are always safe whenever something happens to your devices. Either it gets stolen and you don't have access to the data anymore. In that case, the encryption will also help you because if your device is encrypted, then the person who stole your device doesn't gain access to any of your important account credentials and stuff. So that is important as well, to make sure you keep backups that work. So also make sure to test them, because if you don't test them, then you don't have a backup. So they really help recover from ransomware. Maybe I should explain what it is shortly. It's essentially malware that locks your computer, that sort of encrypts all your files, and the criminal that did that wants you to pay for unlocking your device, usually using some cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, and then they extort you, and you may or may not regain access to your data. So in order to prevent that from happening, you really need good backups, and and that's the easiest way. If you then recover from the backup, reinstall completely, you know that the malware isn't on there, assuming that you pick a reasonably old backup, so you don't have the malware already on there. But it can help against a lot of ransomware attacks. Next slide, please. So the next point I want to talk about is in a little bit about network security. So how do you connect to the internet, and who do you trust while your packets go through the network? So the first thing is, of course, your internet service provider, your ISP. This is the party that you buy internet from. In the Netherlands, this is usually something like KPN or Ziggo. But another thing is, for instance, free Wi-Fi in the train, right? Or any other in a restaurant or any other sort of unsecured space. anyone who is on that same network as you can sniff your packets really easily using something like a Wireshark, for instance, packet sniffer. So then they can sniff your packets. If it's an unencrypted site, then they can see the entire contents of your packets. And if it is encrypted, they can't, although they do see exactly which websites you visited, which resources were downloaded and stuff. So that's a danger if you're using any sort of public free Wi-Fi. There are many other people on it too. So in a train, for instance, it could be 500 other people on the network. That one of them may run a packet sniffer, right? So you never know. The same in airports and stuff, any sort of public place, hotels. That's always a risk. So in order to prevent that from happening, use a trusted VPN. That's basically the answer. So use Proton VPN, for instance, but there are others as well, ExpressVPN, NordVPN, a couple of others. But use a trusted VPN when you're on an unsecure network. Because what then happens is that the entire connection is encrypted from your device to their server and possibly further to whatever site you try to contact. But that way, it basically gets wrapped, and there's no way to see who you were contacting if there is if the network is unsecure. And this can also be used, as I say on the slide here, to connect to corporate networks from the outside. So in this day in this day of working from home, for instance, many people will have access to all kinds of corporate networks. They need to have access from their homes. So in order to do that securely, the company can set up a VPN so you can connect to all kinds of shared drives and documents and stuff from your device, from your home. I also want to quickly talk about DNS, the domain name system. I should point this out. This is basically the system that translates your names of domains like google.com or yahoo.com, or you name it, any sort of website, to an IP address. The danger with that is that if you use something like the Google DNS, which is 8.8.8.8 or 8.8.4.4, those two, if you set that, then what will happen is Google will know every single website that you visit. So, because in order for the computer to connect to the network and get your resources downloaded and for your browser to display it, the computer needs to connect to an IP address, and that translation happens at the DNS server. And if you set, for instance, the Google DNS, that is not a good idea, because that simply means that that they will know a lot more about you than you may realize. And also for high risk, like I said before, there's Tor, the onion routing solution. And for routers, so this is the box in your home that you connect your computer to, there's software like OpenWRT, which is open source. And this is supported by many, it supports many routers, and this prevents any sort of proprietary software on the router from having some sort of backdoor there as well. Like if you're using some Huawei router or a Cisco router or something, then it stands to reason that there may be some backdoors there. So if you use OpenWRT, I think there's another one as well, and reflash the software on your router, that will help. And you usually get a lot more possibilities for your network and configuring your network as well. So whereas a lot of these proprietary things are locked down very much, if you flash them, then that means that you get a lot more bang for your buck, essentially, for the router. Okay, next slide, please. So this is sort of what I want to leave you with, is a couple of privacy-friendly messaging alternatives, both for email and for messaging. Instant messaging. Signal is a really good one. It's been in the news lately. Again, Belgium is trying to ban Signal and try to force them to keep all kinds of metadata about your conversations. So who you contacted, when you contacted them, when you logged in, all kinds of metadata about your conversations. They want to force Signal to store that. Signal famously doesn't do that. They only have two kinds of metadata about you, which is the account creation date and the timestamp of when you last logged in, and that is it. This has been proven in court cases as well, when they've been asked, like, give us all your data by the Justice Department in the US, I believe, and then they just send a piece of paper with like 2 timestamps of that user, and that is it. Like, Signal doesn't know who you contact, what the content of your conversation is, or when you contacted them, or something like that. So that's a good alternative for apps like WhatsApp, for instance, or Telegram. Session is another one. This is a similar purpose as Signal, except it is federated, so it doesn't require a phone number to use it. You can use any sort of username, and because it's federated, there are multiple servers that you can connect to as well. Federation is essentially decentralized messaging, similar to how email works, right? There are multiple email servers. They all work across the same, according to the same protocol. So a person from one server can email someone from another server, and that works. And that's the same with session. 2 people on a session, separate session servers, can speak to each other. So that's another alternative for messaging. For email, I listed 2 that have free plans as well. You can create an account at ProtonMail and Tutanota. I know of ProtonMail and also Tutanota that they have other sort of apps as well. So not only email, but also calendar, and ProtonMail also includes a VPN, as well as a Proton Drive, so you can store files on there as well. By the way, we don't have any sort of affiliation with this. I mean, we do have a partnership with ProtonMail for our for our own email, but that is basically, but that's full disclosure. But it's but these are a couple of messaging and email apps that I wanted to discuss as well. I'll leave you with, and I think the next slide is the questions, right? Yeah. So just before we go into questions, I've added a link here to not only our own websites, but also to privacytools.io, which has a list of all the all kinds of tools that you can use, browser extensions, alternatives for various things, categorized as well. Per category, you can just click, oh, I want a secure web browser, or a secure OS, or anything like that. And it has links to a curated list of good privacy tools. So, and our contact data is on the slide as well. So yeah, if there are any questions, please let us know. We'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, so as Sander said, please ask your questions right now. First of all, we'd like to thank Annie and Sander both for the interesting talk. I think it would be very informative. So if you have any questions, maybe specific to Annie or specific to Sander, just post them, and otherwise we can do some general questions as well. I personally do have a question. I think this might be a little bit more applicable to Annie, but also because, well, kind of to hop on the whole conflict trend, specifically in the aftermath of conflicts such as Ukraine? Do you see, for instance, an increase when you look at government policies to be more aware of the situations of, for instance, security on the internet?
Sorry, you're breaking
Is
up
there a
there. I
link,
didn't hear
and how
that
does the
bit.
government regard it in general?
So you broke up there in the middle of that question. I didn't hear the middle of it.
I think Martijn is having, yeah, he warned me about this, but it's okay, because you know what? I have some questions of my own for you guys as well. Yeah, actually, so first of all, thank you so much for the things that you guys have told us about. And you guys and I have been getting to know each other and working with each other for the past few months. And we've talked quite a fair bit about certain things related to the matter of trust. And a question that I had for both of you guys was, how do we know which companies and products to trust? And should we expect a certain kind of give and take of our privacy for the services that we buy, just like we have a social contract with states?
Shall I go on the trust bit first?
Please, anyone.
The best way to make sure that you know how to trust a certain product or service is A, if it's been audited, but B, if it's open source or free software, so that the source code is available for inspection. And I also think it's a good way to see if they're trustworthy is if they allow you to host your own infrastructure, right? So it's not good enough, I would say, if only the source code is available, although that's good. But also if you are allowed to run your own sort of server or version of the product on your own infrastructure, that's a good mark of trust as well. So essentially, and it's also stops vendor locking, right? If you use open source or free software, because if you're using open standards and open software, then you can easily move from one solution to the other without something being locked in a proprietary platform. So if they allow that sort of option that you can easily take your data out if you wanted to, that's another good sign as well. Maybe he has some more to say about that.
Oh, well, a little bit, yes. So I totally agree with Sander, what he's talking about with open source software. I mean, I've been an advocate for this for 15 years now, all over Europe. But what I am aware of is the fact that in July 2001, there was a European directive that was put out saying that Europe, the EU, should move away from their reliance on closed proprietary corporate software coming out of the US. And they should also start building their own tech infrastructure, not just the software, but the hardware and the communications networks and all the rest of it, to move away from the US corporate dominance. So I think these are very interesting questions. And of course, it all got lost because that was only 3 months before 9/11 happened. The war on terror started, invasions across the Middle East and across North Africa and all the rest of it. So all this sort of stuff got a bit lost. But from what I'm hearing now, these sort of arguments are now coming back within the EU. So we shall see. Despite what Belgium is threatening with Signal, which I'm not terribly happy about because I love Signal and I live in Belgium. But I think there is more of an appetite to try and address these things. One for privacy, one for standing up for the rights that EU has said, like GDPR and things like that, but also just security, basic human rights in terms of how we as citizens, individuals, corporations can actually be secure and away from the predation of global corporations. So there seems to be a sort of evolving tenor here that's interesting.
So we don't know exactly. So if I understand correctly, we shouldn't really try to put up with losing our privacy for the sake of getting these services. but at the same time, we don't really know what the parameters will be because it's still an evolving field and the discussions are still malleable.
Oh, yeah, come on. I mean, you know, most of us have given up our privacy because we like using various apps on our phones. It's very convenient to do stuff. It's very fun to do
Exactly.
stuff. Yeah. And a couple of generations grown up knowing nothing else. I'm old enough to remember pre that and being aware because of the spy stuff and the whistleblowing stuff, exactly what the threats are. But, you know, anyone in their 20s, 30s, younger is going to just think she's an old fart talking about stuff that, you know, is not relevant. I'm sorry it is, because if we don't have privacy, if we can't push back against authorities, and this is what the youngsters should think about. People who want to get involved in climate change activism or Black Lives Matter activism or free speech activism or whatever, if they just think they can go and do this without any pushback from the authorities or from the police or from the corporations, or as laws change in the future, they will be the ones that are going to be targeted. Their information will have been held and will be used against them in the future. So for any of these youngsters going into any of these sort of activist groups, this is a baseline that they should be thinking about. Because if you don't have privacy, you cannot be an activist. You cannot be an effective activist. Or if you are an effective activist, you might be imprisoned in a few years. So that would be I think my key lesson I would leave from this session is that's what people need to think about. And youngsters coming through, passionate about what they believe in, passionate about trying to make a difference, need also to think about. It's key.
That's quite interesting. I never really thought about that way, that connection of privacy and democracy. It's quite new. Yeah.
I would like to add a little bit to that. I'm sorry.
Yes.
But that's why it's also important, because you mentioned sort of a trade-off, right? It's
not a trade-off, Sander. It's a baseline.
Yeah,
it's a fundamental human right.
I understand that, but Dawood mentioned a trade-off. That's what I meant. That's why it's important also to, I think, for the open source community and free software community to really invest in user experience and making sure that everything that they build is easy to use. Because if it's not easy to use, then it becomes this sort of extra barrier to a secure alternative, right? So we want to make sure that that is as easy to use as possible, so everyone is using open and secure software and it can be easily audited.
Yeah, totally agree.
So sorry to interrupt. I think I'm back again.
Yeah, you're back.
There is a question in the chat box from Madison, and she asks, do you have a VPN you'd recommend for your phone? She has used anonymous VPN and CyberGhost on her computer. She was just curious to know.
Okay. Well, personally, I use Proton VPN on my phone, so that's my answer. But obviously, it depends on your trust level. Do you trust a VPN or not? In this case, I do trust Proton, but there are different considerations for you. If you have a VPN that you really trust and like, and that you are happy with, then if they have it on their phone, you should use that. But
how can you verify if a VPN is trustworthy or not?
Very difficult. It's it's essentially your ISP, sort of an ISP on top of an ISP, right? So all of your network traffic is going through it. So yeah, you really just have to look at sort of their business practices, other opinions as well. But there can be some popular ones that do not so good things. So that's difficult to do. I think you would need like a full audit or something, and even then it depends on who did it, and it's almost impossible.
Can I just also make a point that even if you have a VPN and you've got great software on your phone, the hardware is wide open anyway. So this is why, for example, I'm talking to you now via my Android Google smartphone thing, and I know it's wide open, and that's how I use my commercial apps. my computer is much more shut down because I use open source and keep it safe as far as I can. So people need to be aware of, it's not just the software, and it's not just about, you know, getting a few prophylactics like a VPN or, you know, using Tor or using Tails or whatever. You actually need to think about the hardware, which is why it's interesting to talk to security aware and sustainability aware corporations that are building hardware that could be safer.
So
that's a whole new talk, and that's what we're going to be talking about at the World Ethical Data Forum in October.
Well,
Madison, second question. Oh, sorry. Do you want to take? Okay. Yeah, Madison asked the second question. She says, I'm implementing a qualified electronic signature solution for my company in line with the EU's ELDAS regulation. Yeah, that's the one. The EU has a list of trusted service providers for qualified electronic signatures. To what extent can companies rely on EU trusted third parties to protect the data companies upload to these platforms' clouds? What do you guys think of third-party cloud security / insecurity?
Never trust them would be my answer.
Yeah, so
Sander might have a different view, but that would.
Yeah, but yeah. So regarding the specific EIDAS list, I'm not too familiar with that, so I can't comment on which companies are on there, which ones of those are trustworthy or not. Regarding cloud, I mean, a nice way to think about it is cloud is just another person's computer, right? So you're uploading data into a server system that is under control of someone else. So so that is that's the main issue that I think Annie and I agree on. So there's this sort of trust required if you want to use them, but the question is, should you?
Can I give you an example from about 10 years ago, when it became really cool? Because I was, you know, floating around all the hacktivist scenes, including in the Netherlands then, and it, you know, cloud computing was the really cool new thing. And then Amazon started selling its cloud services initially to the CIA, and then it sold them to the other 15 or 16 US intelligence agencies, as well as, you know, to many, many of us across the planet. So, you know, whom are you going to trust in that situation? I wouldn't touch something like that with a barge pole. But I'm more out there. Sorry, I've been a campaigner for too long, and I'm probably not a good representative for this sort of discussion tonight.
I think that what the EU wants to get at is wean themselves off of US cloud dependence and start with EU clouds based in EU, which I think is a good thing. It's a good move. And I also recognize the value of offsite storage, like the cloud is what the cloud essentially is. In that, you know, if your place burns down in a fire, you still have your data somewhere. But if, for instance, you could solve the trust issue with encryption, right? So you can make a volume encrypted, put all your files in there, then synchronize that encrypted file on the cloud, and then the cloud provider doesn't know what's in it. So there's solutions around it, but they are, as I said, is a sort of balanced. They're less convenient to use. So that's it.
Okay, I'm just going to throw this phrase in just to scare people, because this is looking forward.
Yeah.
Why do you want to scare people so much, Annie?
Well, no, people need to be aware of the threats so that they can mitigate against them and take steps. And I'm sure we've got loads of people in the audience who are working in this area or interested in this area. And I say, these are the things we need to think about. And this would be it: quantum computing, quantum cryptography. So I will let them run with it. But, you know, I have a huge hinterland of experience, and some of my other campaigning friends are much older than me, so I've learned a lot from them. And then I have this wonderful opportunity to work with younger people, and to be able to talk to younger people and try and pass this awareness on and see where they run with it, because it's so important. It's too important not to. And that's what I love doing, and that's what I've really enjoyed doing today.
So with quantum computing also, right, this is the next step. So a lot of encryption depends on the difficulty of factorizing large primes. And with quantum computing, this may be a lot easier. So in that case, it sort of breaks the encryption, and that's sort of the next sort of discussion is how do we solve it?
Just like that. Yeah.
Well, I think we're straying a little bit too far and having our own little discussion.
We
Maddie,
are, yes.
I hope that answered your question. If anyone else also has questions, please feel free to speak into the microphone, just shout it out. I highly encourage that.
I do have one question myself before.
Yes, yeah, because you got cut off.
Again. Yeah. So I think it's also on more on awareness side. This is not the same question that I had before, but it's more on like what's the level of the current awareness in general, but also like on the youngsters, and should there be more promotion of these topics, and how would you go about this? Because personally, I think like I am already lagging behind it. I would say that I'm quite aware of my situation.
I think there could be a lot of increased awareness still. There's a lot of room of improvement in that space. I mean, I don't, you're talking with other people. I mean, a lot of people don't even take simple, two-factor authentication steps, or, use a password manager, or use different passwords for different accounts. And those are really simple steps. And that's why I highlighted them and started with them, that you can take to start improving your situation in that space. But it's and then, obviously you can take the next step, and then start building upon your knowledge as you learn more. But I think that, a lot of things can still be done to increase awareness. What do you think, Annie?
I think this is precisely what the World Ethical Data Foundation and Forum is trying to do, is to raise awareness about what the concepts and the principles are, what the threats are, and also what we can do to mitigate against them, which is what Sander's done so well tonight. However, it is a bit of a dry subject. I mean, ethical data, that sort of thing. So any way that we can put the message out there, which is why I use the old spy stuff. It's like, what's it like to be on the run? What's it like to be spied on all the time? Bloody hell. But in terms of the fact that we are all now spied on, absolutely automatically by the little spy phones in our pockets or by our computers, people should be aware of that. They should be aware of the fact that, if they have a conversation, with their partner who might be in a different country, they might be being spied on. If they are trying to do work, or they're trying to do their finance, or they're trying to sort out medical records, that can all be hoovered up under various national and international laws. People should be aware of this, and trying to make it palatable and digestible to most people, particularly I'll say youngsters, because that makes me sound so bloody old, but it's true, who've grown up knowing nothing but the internet, is the most crucial thing that we need to do these days as the tech moves forward exponentially. We need to make sure that people are aware of what is at risk when it comes to their human rights, online as well as in the real world. And the world is going really nuts at the moment with wars and, climate change, and with potential food shortages, energy shortages. We need to know how we can use the internet to work together safely, and potentially push back safely if we need to, as well as just work safely online. Because of COVID, we've all had to do that. These are huge questions. So I think what I would like to say right at the end of this is just everyone needs to think about this. It's not just a convenient little phone in your pocket. It's not just a convenient computer. We need to be thinking about, if things were to go really tits up, excuse my language, we need to have ways of pushing back too. And that's what I have been trying to do for 20 years. And that's why I got involved with the World Ethical Data Foundation and World Ethical Data Forum. So please, anyone, have a look at that website, worldethicaldata.org, and get involved. And we can help, and we can advise, and we can move this forward before we all get lost in the swamp that's going to hit us.
But this points back to, comes back right to my first question, because that was also the part on, well, as you see, more conflicts-based awareness as well. But would you say that, for instance, the recent conflicts, such as Ukraine, which hacking was also mentioned, done by Russians and vice versa, would you say that, for instance, these conflicts raise general governmental awareness as well? So do you see that, for instance, the Dutch government, what is their current approach? Would you say it's up to date? Do we need to, well, I think they might be lacking. That's a suggestion, but just some information there.
I think a lot of governments, national governments, as well as even supranational organizations like the EU and the UN, are behind the times. I'm based in Brussels, so I work with a lot of people here, and they are very well aware of what's going on in the tech world, but they are hamstrung by the slow bureaucratic process of trying to reform. It doesn't mean they don't want to. It doesn't mean they're not aware of the vulnerabilities. So any help we can give when it's reaching out to universities, reaching out to students, to new companies about open source, for example, or encryption, for example, or whatever, let's just try and do it. Because if we don't do that as civil society, we're all going to be screwed.
Actually, touching on that, it brings up a question in mind. So far, what we've mostly been talking about is the stuff that's being done to us. But what about the things that we do that are detrimental? So we talked a little bit before the event about modern changes in consumer culture. It's actually one of the things that are mentioned in the event description, but I don't believe we've touched on yet. How do you think changes in consumer culture from, let's say, 20 years ago until now affects the landscape, the threat landscape that we see today? Has it contributed to molding it? How do you think it will affect it going on in the future with the way that companies are adapting their services?
Are you talking about globalization and things like that? Well, I mean, that's gone.
Yes,
that's come and gone because
I guess that's part of it. But the way that we buy the products now, like the gadgets that we buy, like the stuff that we just say for convenience sake, or for the giggles, we buy it.
I don't know. I'm not a huge consumer. I mean, I buy food and I buy a bit of wine, and that's about it, really. So.
I think touching on that, I do think that sort of the attack surface has broadened a lot compared to 30 years ago, let's say, with the internet and with all kinds of different ways to reach people worldwide. That requires a lot of thought into making sure that happens safely, and requires us all as civil society to discuss this in various forms and formats. And like Annie said, I mean, that's what we're trying to do at the WEDF.
It's mixing it up, isn't it? Getting people out of their bunkers and
exactly,
talking to people they won't necessarily even think they should talk to, but they should be. Having that overview. But yeah, I mean, I remember when Amazon started in the late 1990s, I was like, yay, we can send, a book or something as a present to a parent without having to be in the country. Great. But I mean, the way these globalized corporations have taken over, and now the supply chains are breaking down, is interesting. But beyond that, I have no views. I'm not a terribly corporate person.
Yeah. Also, it's getting harder and harder to start competition, right? Because the expectation of the consumer is rising and rising. So, for instance, if you wanted to start a competitor to Amazon today or Bol.com,
they will buy you out. I mean, boom, anything, and that's it. You're dead. Well, you're rich, but you're dead.
If you're successful, or they just push you aside or something. It's so much harder nowadays to start in that space because the expectations of consumers have risen so much that you suddenly have to do a lot more upfront work This is also why, for instance, I think we're seeing this, why, for instance, Silicon Valley is so successful in America, right? Because they get to market immediately in one language, in one culture, to 330 million people. So they have a lot of runway to grow in one country before they have to make the step abroad and start translating their services, start dealing with other countries' laws and that stuff. And that's the difficulty that we in the EU have, is that immediately you have to think about those things up front. You immediately have to make sure that everything is available in multiple languages if you want to grow as big as Amazon, let's say. So you immediately have to make sure that things like supply chains as well is another huge thing. Like even trying to get stuff for an Amazon-sized web shop for prices that are competitive, so that you can sell competitively, because people are incredibly price sensitive online. That is difficult. People want to, if you order something on 23:59, 1 minute before 12 in the evening, then they expect it the next morning nowadays. I mean, that's not doable for a small business. I mean, these are huge issues, sort of, where a couple of large companies have entrenched themselves into these sectors, and it's very difficult to move them out. And as Annie said, if you grow too big and become a threat, they will just buy you out.
So then, as my final question, as the individual blades of grass in a grassroots movement scenario, what can we do in order to secure the democratic legal order when it comes to data ethics and digital privacy?
Well, I think it's, as Annie said, it's a human right. And we need to make sure that it stays that way, and that we see it that way, and that young people also see it that way, and that we continue to engage within the sort of frameworks that we have, and try to educate, but also try to influence things in a positive direction. You can start very small. I mean, you don't have to think big, but if you do something locally already, and you're already sort of implanting thoughts into people's heads about, oh wow, I haven't thought about this yet. Like, oh, I should think about this, or I should get involved, or this is exciting. That's important to make sure that we as society keep influencing and keep on the ball, essentially. Yeah.
I would also suggest as well, because I've been involved in grassroots campaigning on various fields, so to speak, for years, and also being painfully aware of the surveillance possibilities and lack of privacy possibilities. What distresses me most is watching local community type grassroots organizations, or even organizations that grow and spread and become national or even international, still using things like bloody Facebook. You can't organize on that. Everything is given away. I mean, it's like the spy's wet dream. So if you are serious about what you're doing and you want to keep your organization and the privacy of your members and what they're doing private, then investigate alternatives. Don't use Facebook. Don't use use Twitter to publicize, but don't communicate on it. So yeah, back to the open source issue, back to the privacy issue, back to the encryption issue. If people are serious about what they want to do, that's how you need to do it. If you're not serious about it and you just want to have a bit of fun and get together and have a community event, whatever. I have no judgment on that. But if it comes to something that you think is really, really important, yeah, you've got to do it properly.
Okay, I think that sums it up. If there are no further questions also from the chat, I would very much like to thank, first of all, the speakers and then the attendees. I think it was a very interesting webinar. I'd also like to thank, of course, Jo Woon for helping me co-host this webinar.
Absolutely.
I think we should also mention that please do also visit, for instance, the WEDF site. You can also visit the JSON site, in which we will be continuing to do these events. Hopefully more cooperations with organizations as WEDF. And we also have some upcoming events in June. So do keep your eyes on those as well. Yeah, and I would say if that someone set up. Again,
thank you so much, everyone who showed up.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks to the speakers, and I hope you enjoy your evening.
Okay, bye-bye.